It's February 13th, 1258. Inside the gilded halls of the Abbasid Palace, where Caliph al-Mustasim has ruled for 36 years, something feels wrong. The fountains are silent. In Baghdad, that doesn't happen without reason. This is the city of wisdom, where water usually sings through courtyards, and scholars from 3 continents cross deserts and seas to study in the greatest library on earth. When the fountains go quiet, it's a warning. The end is here. Beyond the palace walls, the Mongol army blankets the plain, a sea of riders from the steppe, men raised without cities or books, who speak one language, conquest. They ride under banners that have already swallowed kingdoms, and they are here to do more than take a city. They are here to make an example so loud the rest of the world will hear it in terror. And what haunts history isn't only that Baghdad falls. It's what happens after the gates break, what is done to the caliph and to his family. The Mongols don't merely kill, they erase. Here at Dark Chronicles, we dig where history tried to bury its own screams. Persian manuscripts, Mongol records, letters from Venetian traders who escaped the firestorm. Put together, they show what really happened in those 7 days that cracked the Islamic world open. To understand the catastrophe, you have to understand the man at its center. Al-Mustasim isn't just a king. He is the caliph, the deputy of God on earth, successor to the Prophet Muhammad, ruler in a line that has lasted around 800 years. Once, that title meant armies, discipline, and fear. By 1258, it mostly means ceremony. The dynasty is old, and its confidence has gone soft. Al-Mustasim is comfortable, surrounded by courtiers who tell him what he wants to hear. He lives in luxury and believes tradition makes him untouchable. So when the Mongols move toward Baghdad, he assumes, as he always has, that the world will blink first. He trusts Allah to protect him. He can't imagine any army daring to strike the caliphate itself. Baghdad is too sacred, too important, too inevitable to fall. He is wrong. The Mongols are led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. By the time his host reaches Baghdad, they aren't just an army, they are a storm. They've already destroyed more than 40 Persian cities, crushed forces far larger than their own, and left skull piles outside the ruins as warnings. Rivers have run black with ash behind them. Now they stand before the richest city on earth. Hulagu sends a letter. The historian Atta Malik Juvaini preserves its meaning. Surrender and live. Resist and your city becomes dust. Your palaces burn, your family suffers, your name is erased. Al-Mustasim reads it and laughs. He tells his court, "These barbarians don't know who they speak to. I am the caliph. God will not abandon me." On January 29th, 1258, the siege begins. This is no ordinary assault. The Mongols bring Chinese engineers with gunpowder, rockets, and siege machines Baghdad has never faced. Day and night, the walls are hammered. The sky shakes with impact. Stones burst from the battlements. Towers tilt and crumble. The defenders fight bravely, but bravery can't stop an enemy that has turned warfare into a science. By February 5th, the walls break. By the 10th, resistance is finished. And on February 13th, Hulagu walks into the throne room. Al-Mustasim is forced to kneel. His golden robes are torn. His turban, the symbol of divine authority, lies in the dust. The man who trusted heaven now looks painfully mortal. He begs for mercy. Hulagu studies him like prey, then asks, "Where is your God now?" The caliph's lips move in silent prayer, but no answer comes. Hulagu says, "You loved gold. Let's see if gold can feed you." The treasury is dragged in, centuries of wealth heaped into glittering mountains. Then the soldiers force al-Mustasim to eat it. Coins shoved between his teeth, gold pressed into his mouth, silver ground against his gums until his teeth crack. When he tries to refuse, they beat him until he swallows. He is not allowed to faint, not allowed to die. Not yet. When they finally stop, his stomach is ruined and swollen with metal, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy with shock. But this is only the doorway. Hulagu wants the family brought in so the caliph understands exactly what it means for a dynasty to end. Al-Mustasim has 3 sons and 4 daughters. Somewhere beyond those doors, they can hear the chaos. Boots on stone, shouted orders in a language they don't understand. The city outside burning. The caliph can't look away. Hulagu makes sure of that. The first dragged forward is the eldest daughter, Princess Fatima. She is 27, celebrated across the Islamic world for her beauty and her mind. She studied philosophy, spoke 5 languages, and wrote poetry read from Cairo to Damascus. She was raised to believe knowledge could save the world. Now she is shoved to her knees before her father, in a room that smells of smoke and fresh blood. Mongol custom demanded special treatment for highborn captives. Special meant spectacle. Hulagu orders her robes removed. Fatima refuses, so the soldiers tear them away. Rashid al-Din, writing later, cannot stomach the full description. He records only that what was done to her was done before her father's eyes, and when it ended, she was no longer alive. Other accounts are clearer. A Venetian merchant later writes what survivors whispered. Fatima is assaulted by multiple men, one after another, while her father is forced to watch. When she dies, her body is thrown outside the palace for dogs to feed on. Pause on that. A princess, a poet, a scholar, reduced to a trophy of cruelty by conquerors who see libraries as kindling. And her father, the caliph, sits helpless, watching the world he believed eternal collapse in front of him. But the night isn't over. After Fatima, Hulagu calls for the sons, and the caliph knows what comes next. He just doesn't know how long he'll be forced to endure it. The 3 sons of al-Mustasim are dragged into the throne room next. They're young, too young to understand that history has already shut the door behind them. Yesterday, they were heirs to an empire. Today, they stand chained in a palace that belongs to someone else. The eldest, Prince Mubarak, is 23. The middle son, Prince Ahmed, is 21. The youngest, Prince Ali, is 14, still half a child, pulled forward into a room slick with fear and stained with what they've just seen. Hulagu looks at them the way a butcher looks at livestock. Not angry, not rushed, just measuring, deciding, already certain of the ending. He asks them the same question he asked their father. Where is your God now? For a heartbeat, the princes don't answer. The world has flipped so fast it feels unreal. Prince Mubarak steps forward first. Maybe it's courage, maybe it's pride. Maybe it's the last spark in a life built on certainty. He says, Allah will punish you for this. Hulagu nods slowly, like a teacher acknowledging a student's reply. Then he gives a quiet command. There is a Mongol rule recorded by Juvaini and others, that royal blood must not be spilled openly. Whether it's superstition or fear of a curse, they believe letting a king's blood soak into the earth brings misfortune. So they kill royalty without shedding blood. For these 3 princes, Hulagu chooses one of the oldest methods in the Mongol arsenal, the method of the carpet. Heavy rugs are brought in. The princes are wrapped inside them, tight enough that they can't struggle, tight enough that their chests can barely rise. Their voices are swallowed into the wool, turning into muffled, desperate cries. Then the carpets are laid flat on the marble floor, and the horsemen ride over them again and again and again. Rashid al-Din writes that the sound wasn't a clean snap. It was like wood breaking in slow, ugly pieces, bones collapsing under hooves, flesh crushed into stone. The cries thin out, then lose their humanity, then vanish. Al-Mustasim sits frozen. He doesn't lunge. He doesn't scream. He doesn't beg. Not because he doesn't want to, because nothing is left in him that still believes begging matters. His sons are dead, and Hulagu still isn't finished. There are 3 daughters remaining: Princess Zainab, 25, Princess Qadia, 20, and little Princess Aisha, 12, small enough that her bracelets still slide down her wrists like she's playing dress-up in a world that has turned into a nightmare. For these girls, Hulagu decides a bloodless death is too gentle. Mongol practice often spared high-born women from execution, but not from fate. They were spoils, not for common soldiers, reserved for generals and nobles, living trophies to remind the conquered that the Mongols didn't just take your land, they took your future. Zainab and Qadia are seized first. Hulagu gives them away like rewards for loyal service. They are dragged out of Baghdad and into the endless steppe, thousands of miles away from the gardens and libraries of their childhood. They will live in felt tents among people who do not speak Arabic, who do not read, who do not build cities. Their captors can't pronounce their names, and soon those names will disappear. A Mongol document uncovered centuries later briefly mentions 2 Arab women of high birth given to the general Kitbuka after Baghdad's conquest. And then nothing. No record after that. No graves, no poems, no children who carried the Abbasid bloodline into ink. They don't die on paper. They simply stop existing. But little Aisha isn't handed over. Hulagu keeps her for himself, not as a concubine, but as proof. A living sign that even a caliph's bloodline can be bent into Mongol shape. He forces her into Mongol clothing, forces her to speak Mongolian, forces her to abandon her name. A Persian chronicler decades later tells of meeting an elderly woman in Tabriz who claimed she was Aisha. She would have been around 80 by then, bent with age, her Arabic broken by a foreign accent she never chose. She barely remembered Baghdad, but she remembered the night her family died. She remembered Hulagu leaning close, whispering something only she could hear. "You are the last. Your line ends with you." And she said, with dead eyes and a voice that had spent a lifetime swallowing grief, that he was right. Think about what that means. A child who should have grown up in silk and sunlight instead grows old in exile, carrying the ashes of a dynasty inside her chest, living long enough to watch the world move on without her. Back in the throne room, Al-Mustasim still lives, barely. His stomach is wrecked from the gold. His spirit has been ripped out and trampled. He has watched his sons crushed and his daughters stolen. But Hulagu doesn't kill him right away. He wants the final act to be ceremonial. He orders the caliph wrapped in a carpet, tight and suffocating, just like his sons. The caliph can hardly breathe. The darkness inside the rug is complete. No horses come this time. Instead, the Mongols build a wooden platform above him, and on that platform they hold a feast. Hulagu and his generals sit directly over the bundled caliph, eating roasted meat, drinking wine, laughing and telling stories while the man beneath them slowly dies. Every shift of weight presses the carpet deeper into his ribs. Every burst of laughter steals a little more air from his lungs. The feast lasts all night. At dawn, when the last cups are drained, they roll the carpet out. Rashid al-Din describes the body. The caliph's face purple, his eyes open, no wound in sight, no blood spilled, only the frozen evidence of suffocation. 800 years of Abbasid rule ends there. Not in battle, not in dignity, but under a party floor. And the horror doesn't stop at the palace gates. Without the caliph, Baghdad is defenseless. The Mongols pour into the city like fire through dry grass. They slaughter without pause. Men, women, children, merchants, scholars, imams, beggars. It doesn't matter who you are. The only thing that matters is that you live inside a city Hulagu has decided must vanish. Whole neighborhoods are erased in hours. Bodies pile in streets so thick that horses struggle to step without crushing flesh. Chroniclers estimate close to 1 million dead. A city that once held the brightest minds on earth becomes a graveyard so vast it has no edges. Then the Mongols turn to the House of Wisdom, the legendary library, the brain of the Islamic world. Manuscripts from Greece, Persia, India, Arabia, scientific works, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, texts found nowhere else on the planet. They burn it. They throw books into the Tigris until the river runs black with ink, then red with blood. The current chokes on pages. The water becomes a moving bruise. One scholar, Ibn al-Fuwati, survives only by hiding inside a well. 3 days later, when he crawls out, Baghdad is silent. He writes that the streets were covered with corpses, the air smelled of death, and dogs ate bodies because there was nobody left to bury them. Imagine walking through your own city and hearing nothing but flies and distant cries. Imagine smoke and ink and rot mixing in the air. Imagine a civilization losing not only its people, but its memory, its books, its art, its arguments, its dreams, shredded and scattered like ash. The Mongol Empire will last another century and a half. It will conquer more land than any empire before it. But there is one thing it cannot conquer: remembrance. Even as Baghdad falls, the story of what happened to the caliph's family survives. Survivors whisper it in fragments. They tell it to children in low voices at night, careful not to say the worst parts aloud, but needing the truth to live somewhere. And those whispers reach us, not to reopen wounds for entertainment, but because some truths are too terrible to forget. Because if we forget them, history doesn't end. It repeats. When people talk about the fall of Baghdad, they usually talk about numbers. 1 million dead, a library burned, an empire collapsed. But numbers don't scream. Numbers don't beg. Numbers don't remember what it felt like to be alive 5 minutes before the world turned black. So stay inside that week a little longer, because the end of a civilization isn't a single moment. It's a chain of moments, each one snapping something that can never be repaired. After the caliph dies beneath that platform, Hulagu doesn't slow down. If anything, the killing becomes easier. Because now there's no symbolic barrier left, no deputy of God, no sacred shield, no political cost. Just a city full of people who, in the eyes of the conquerors, belong to nobody. The Mongols fan out in waves that are organized and methodical, not frantic. Think less like a riot and more like a harvest. District by district, street by street, house by house. If they find someone hiding, that person is dragged into the open and cut down. If a family tries to run, riders chase them like animals. If a crowd gathers in a mosque, hoping sanctuary still means something, they are slaughtered where they kneel. Survivors later say the blood ran so thick that sandals stuck to the ground. that the crying went on for days, that by the third night, the city smelled less like smoke and more like meat left too long in the sun. And it isn't only the poor who die. Baghdad is the nerve center of scholarship. Doctors, astronomers, translators, mathematicians, the people who carry the world's knowledge forward, are hunted down as carefully as soldiers. To the Mongols, a scholar isn't a treasure. He's a threat, because knowledge creates power, and the Mongols aren't here to rule Baghdad the way Baghdad understands rule. They're here to end it. The House of Wisdom burns for days. Let that picture settle in your mind. Rooms stacked floor to ceiling with texts from Greece, Persia, India, Arabia, centuries of debates and discoveries, works copied by hand, illuminated, corrected, cherished, a living brain of a civilization. And now men who can't read are feeding it to fire. Books are thrown into the Tigris so fast the water clogs with pages. Ink dissolves into the current until the river turns dark, like a bruise spreading under skin. Black first, then, as bodies pile into it, red. There's a story repeated in multiple sources about a Mongol soldier riding into a flooded courtyard. Manuscripts float around his horse's legs. He laughs and says, "Look, even the water tries to learn from us." It's a cruel joke, but jokes are how conquerors stay human while doing inhuman things. By the seventh day, Baghdad isn't a city anymore. It's a carcass. Walls still stand. Palaces still cast shadows. But life is gone. Markets are smashed. Canals are choked with bodies. Alleys are piled so high with dead that survivors can't walk without stepping on someone's face. And for the first time in Islamic memory, the capital of the Caliphate is silent. No call to prayer. No laughter. No pages turning. Nothing. Now here's the twist history always gives you after a tragedy this huge. The Mongols don't stay to rebuild. They don't even really stay to rule in the way Baghdad once knew rule. They loot. They burn. They make their point. Then they ride out toward the next city, the next kingdom, the next horizon. Because that is what the Mongol machine does. It moves. Baghdad is an exclamation mark hammered into the map, meant to terrify everyone else into surrender. And it works. Across the Middle East, leaders hear what happened here and start opening gates without a fight. Hulagu doesn't need to kill as many thousands anymore, because Baghdad has already killed millions for him in fear. But even as the Mongols ride west, even as the smoke thins and the river slowly clears, the world can't stop staring at what happened inside that palace. A caliph forced to chew his own treasure. A princess destroyed while her father watched. Princes crushed without a drop of royal blood spilled. Daughters vanished into the steppe. A child renamed and kept alive as a living trophy. People whisper those details the way you whisper a curse. Not because they want to relive it, but because they need to understand it. Because if something like that can happen to Baghdad, the jewel of the world, the heart of knowledge, then it can happen anywhere. And that realization changes history. The Islamic Golden Age doesn't vanish overnight, but its center of gravity shifts. Cities that once sent scholars to Baghdad become the new hubs. Cairo, Damascus, later Samarkand, and beyond. The world keeps moving, but it moves with a scar. You can trace that scar through centuries, in the way rulers build thicker walls, in the way tradition stops being trusted as a shield, in how libraries start getting guarded like fortresses. But scars don't live only in stone. They live in stories. After Baghdad falls, survivors scatter like sparks into the desert and across the sea. Some end up in Aleppo, some in Cairo, some in tiny villages where nobody cares about dynasties, only about tomorrow's bread. And in those places, at night, they tell their children what they saw. Not all of it. Not the worst pieces. Not the parts that would break a child's mind. But enough. Enough to keep memory alive. Enough that the Abbasid family doesn't disappear completely, even though the Mongols tried their best to make sure it did. They could destroy buildings, they could burn books, they could crush bloodlines. They couldn't crush remembrance. History is stubborn like that. The Mongol Empire itself eventually fractures. Great khans turn on one another. Descendants of conquerors become rulers, then become ordinary men, then become names in old chronicles. But Baghdad remains a warning carved into time, a reminder that brilliance is fragile, that arrogance invites storms, that sometimes a world doesn't fall because it lacks strength, but because it believes too deeply in its own safety. Al-Mustasim believed his title made him immortal. He believed God would never let Baghdad die. But faith without realism can become its own kind of blindness. And if there's one lesson this story hammers into us, it's this. No civilization, no matter how rich, how wise, how advanced, is immune to collapse if it stops paying attention to the world outside its walls. Now sit with that for a second. Think about the fountains going silent. The first sign wasn't an arrow. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't fire. It was stillness. That quiet before the end. Because that's how disasters often feel at first. Like nothing. Like a normal day. Like the world is safe and steady and permanent. Until suddenly it isn't. You've just walked through one of the darkest weeks in human history. A week where a city's body and soul were torn apart. Where power became cruelty for sport. Where a dynasty that lasted 8 centuries was erased in 7 days. And the reason we tell it isn't because darkness is entertaining. We tell it because forgetting is dangerous. Because history doesn't stay buried on its own. We keep it buried by looking away, by letting numbers replace faces, by letting silence fall again, like those fountains in the palace. And the ones who forget history are the ones history finds again. So hold on to this story. Share it. Talk about it. Keep it alive. Because some truths are too terrible to be lost.